Hey guys, Memphis here. Just a friendly Canadian reminder to keep forest spying, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube.
A couple of years ago, I made a video in which I constructed kind of a fantasy super team for North America. Now, admittedly, that video was a little bit embarrassing because I took a gamble on who I wanted as one of my entry players. And from memory, I believe I picked Roka, who obviously didn't go on to do jack shit on LAN, but online had looked pretty fabulous at the time. Might even have been cheating was the implication by some people, and for whatever reason it didn't transition offline. Even when he had Sean Gares as in-game leader, wasn't able to get it done. So I thought this is an interesting concept to revisit, because practically every single year there's a different talent pool at the top in each region. I've done these videos for multiple other regions, so I thought with NA being a little bit of a mess right now, why not make one for North America? So the main issues in North America is, first of all, the best North American team is Team Liquid, and to some degree, as they have been for the last year or two, they're somewhat hoarding really good talent. But the problem is, despite a couple of really big second places, EPL Season 7, ECS Season 5, they haven't broken through. They haven't won the big championships. CS Summit doesn't really count all in all, especially not this late into the year. Elsewhere, they haven't like supplemented those seconds with like tons of top fours and been super rock solid. They've had some really depressing results as well, where they've gone out 9th, they've gone out 13th. So they've been way too up and down. They seem to be on the downward tick now, and they clearly have some issues. And I actually think even at their peak, one issue they had for me was that beyond the numbers, I don't think they actually had a true superstar player. They had a very good trio of players in Naf, Elysian, Twists, at least when they were rolling. And Naf generally has looked very good. I think Elysian, in terms of all-around game, for me, has been the best player in the team. But they haven't had that Nico, simple, like that level of a player in their squad. And I think that's something they have lacked. And they also haven't necessarily had the killer instinct. Then you look at Cloud9. Okay, they were great at the major. After that, they fell right off. Obviously, they've fallen apart as a squad, and they've never been able to retool in any kind of convincing manner. Stewie and now Tarek as well are over on MIBR, so you can't use them anymore in an NA team. Sean Gares, the most decorated in-game leader, is semi-retired. No one even knows if he's coming back. He's off on analysis desks. NRG's decent, and they're a team that generally seems to have potential, but a lot of the potential is in the future. Their trio of stars are young players. They're still semi-proven, still unproven in certain cases. Some might never make it. You never know. So you can't really bank on them or go ahead and take them, because you're banking too much on them improving a lot, gaining more experience. And then in terms of in-game leader issues, pretty much every team has them. I mean, every NA team has something of a flaw or an unconvincing element in their in-game leader. So when I'm putting together this squad, part of me wants to just go with my classic formation of how I see generally teams actually in most team games being built, and particularly in Counter-Strike, obviously 5-man game, which is the formation where you have two players who are going to generally be your star players. They're going to get more focal. They're going to get more focus within your squad, more attention, more autonomy. They're going to be set up to succeed. Then you have someone who has the skills of a star player. I often call them the hybrid, but they can also play kind of a stabilizing role in the team, and they have a consistent performance, and therefore, as a result, they'll sometimes make up for one of the stars not being as good, but generally they buttress the stars, and therefore you have a heavy output. But because they're consistent, the in-game leader can build around them, and he's still got the option to flex and do tactical aspects, as opposed to just playing brute force off your star players. Then, because that guy's just a consistent player, he's not really playing fully supportive, you have one kind of true support, a guy who's got a mentality that he's going to be a support, he's going to set other people up, he's going to facilitate. And then the in-game leader, because you've got your stars and you've got your consistent hybrid, I'm not meaning hybrid AWPer there, the in-game leader is more on the supportive end of the equation. He's just there to be the brain and do the tactics and run the squad. That's generally been what I think is the ideal format for winning in Counter-Strike. And unless you have some absurd amount of skill and ability in certain roles but not others, I think generally you should try and stick with that format. Now for NA, since they haven't generally had fabulous tactics, and as I say, there's a lot of in-game leader issues, there are definitely NA lineups I could see myself putting together as a super team where I actually might just stack up on talent and say, you know what, fuck having supportive elements. Our in-game leader is not going to be super tactical, so let's just brute force it. Let's just put a lot of skill into the lineup, and let's think of like Fnatic 2016, and let's make the in-game leader like a really harsh support, just tactical, and then we're going to make all the rest of the players frag everyone's head off, and we're going to run over people. We're going to play that NA scrimmy style that they have always defaulted to when under pressure, when lineups aren't necessarily that versatile. Now, when you're making the team, there are definitely a lot of different angles you can go with it. So one of the things I've done is I haven't just picked who I think the best players are now, because I actually don't think that works role for role. So for example, when I was trying to think currently who are the players I could bank on to be really good, when I was trying to pick out my 2 stars and my consistent player, it didn't really work because I was thinking to myself, okay, so in terms of my main star, I want it to be a liege or I want it to be automatic. The problem there is though, when you think of automatic, he's somewhat of a passive player. Elige can be a passive player, but you can certainly encourage him and convince him to be more of a entry element, as we saw at times with Twists at late 2017. Obviously with Nitro, if you go back to 2016, he can play that style if he wants to. Otherwise, he does also default to being a similar kind of passive player. So I feel like out of those 3 players, realistically, you probably should only pick 2. And I think if you pick all 3, then you've got to be really convinced that Elige is going to be an entry style player. And then what are you going to do for your attacking player, for your entry to go along with Elige? It's not probably going to be a NAF or automatic, right? So at that point in time, you've not really got much of a supportive element. So I feel like you've got to pick between them. So what I would go ahead and say is, as of right now, and I'll get into some of the reasons why I didn't pick some of these players, of the 3, I would pick Elige and automatic. I think automatic, and so as a result, I would make a squad. The first composition I would have, and I'll give you a couple of variants for this, would be a team that was Elige and automatic as my star players. I'd have Tarek as my something of a hybrid type player. In terms of the roles, it's going to be different here, but as in I don't expect massive things from him, but he's going to play more of my entry with Elige and have a nice duo there. I would actually, as a support player, this might shock people, I would pick Fugly from NRG. We'll get to that in a minute. And as main game leader, I would pick Gares. Now, the 2 variants I could see to this, which would make sense, is finding a way to put in Stewie2K or put in NAF. So there's a world in which, again, if you want to go brute force, you just take out Fugly in both variants, and you either put Stewie2K in which case you've got some crazy entry combo of Tarek and Stewie, and then Elige doesn't even have to play as aggressive, but he can. You can have a mad entry pack. Automatic's more of the stable, but he's going to have to be a little bit more supportive perhaps in this squad. Or you put in NAF, and then you rely on the idea that like Tarek and Elige are going to be your entries, and they're going to get a lot done. And then you're saying, I'm going to load up on skill. Naf's just going to play a bit on his own, but he's just going to be a consistent player. These are the skill stacked lineups. But the problem is, I'd rather just say, Elige and automatic, you're my star players, mate. Tarek, you're an entry. Do your fucking jobs, and then we'll win from that. And that way, Fugly will be the smart player. He'll be the guy who'll play the supportive aspect. And I'd rather not have to go in an NA fashion and just go all out and just say we can't play proper Counter-Strike. So in this squad, I'm going to get to each player, why I picked them, and then why I didn't pick other players. So the logic here is that we're going to try and convince, because when I think of Tarek and Stewie, I think they both can be aggressive players. I think they're different types of players within the context of that, despite both liking a scrimmy style. Like, I see Tarek better as a second entry, someone who, once he has a little bit of info, then he's confident entrying, got some nice aim, willing to take duels. I would actually compare him to maybe Dennis from Ninjas in Pajamas, formerly Fnatic, formerly LGB. I see him as like both pretty skilled players. Both can be an in-game leader, forced to, but probably shouldn't be. Both better, I think, as a second entry, like to attack, but like to attack when they kind of have a sense for where someone is. Then in terms of Stewie2K, I see him at his best as an entry player, and working with someone else in an entry duo, I'd maybe compare him to Kirby, Config. I think Config's a bit more of a skilled player, but I think Kirby and Config have played that role in North, in Astralis. Obviously, Kirby and Dignitas a couple of years ago, and they've been pretty good at that. Although, obviously, they haven't had a pure skill duo. They were working with Glaive, or they were working with MSL, although you could argue that Kirby and Dupree towards the end of Astralis, in his time in Astralis, did combo a little bit. So my big flaw with the lineup I've made so far is I'm really relying on people to do what I tell them to do. Because if I want to just go by pure roles and what people want to do in the game, I probably shouldn't actually have Elige as some kind of an entry, because I don't feel as though he really embraces that. I think he's just forced into it. So I probably should pick a pure entry, which means I probably should have to take Stewie2K or Rush. And since Rush, aside from when he was in Optic, has had too many tournaments where I felt like he was a little bit underwhelming, and I feel like he's someone who doesn't have the same natural confidence, and somehow it can get sapped from him when he's in the big matches. I'm not sure why that is. Whereas, you know what, I think Stewie2K has flaws, as I'll talk about in a minute, but I do think that he is a ballsy player. He's someone who embraces that. I think he's at his best when he's doing that style. My main issue with him, as I'll get to, is I don't think he was ever as good when he wasn't the in-game leader. So with the original 5 I picked, the Elige, Automatic, Tarek, Fogly, and Gares. Okay, this is my logic here. So Elige, I'm putting as my main star player. I still think, despite the fact that numbers probably suggest Automatic's the best NA player, Automatic hasn't been as deep in tournaments, hasn't played at the same level of competition as Elige. So I'm going to say Elige is the best NA player. I think he's returned to that form. I think you definitely make a case for NAF earlier in the year, other players at the end of last year maybe. He's got a very strong skill set, really nice spray, solid first bullet, good with pistols. I think his all-around game's pretty good. It's not an AWPer, but you don't really need that on this team. I do think he can lack a little something in terms of mentality, as in sometimes I feel like he's one of those players who can just accept losing, or if he goes deep in tournaments, focuses on the fact that that's okay and doesn't have like the killer instinct and drive to win always. So he doesn't necessarily fulfill my superstar mentality. But there's not many players on this list who do, quite frankly, and some of them who do don't necessarily have the all-around skill set and consistency to do it. So I'm going to gamble on Elige as my star player. Still a young guy, still could develop. I'm going to take Automatic as my other star player, my second star in this case. Seems like quite a good player in terms of mentality, seems to be a fairly stable mindset. He's actually done well in teams sometimes when they were losing. I think he's a very good fragger. So I think him and Elige can put big numbers on the scoreboard. He's also notably, out of some of these teams, been good versus EU teams. So that actually gives me some encouragement that he can offset some of Elige if he goes a little bit missing in the big finals versus the Astralises of the FaZe clans of the world. Then I'm picking Tarek as that hybrid player, in as much as I don't expect him to be a star. I want him to just be consistent component, but he's certainly got skills to be a star. And in this case, I want him to be an entry. Now, admittedly, I don't know if he could be a pure entry. He has been someone who seems more comfortable as a second entry, even going back to his time in CLG when he was at his peak. In CLG, he was obviously a better player in Optic and then later on in Cloud9. What I like about Tarek is, first of all, he's got kind of a fuck it mentality. Like, I don't think he overthinks things on the T side. I actually think the fact that he's not some like super cerebral, super smart player, he's more of a simplistic mind for the game, is actually a good thing. I think he doesn't overthink things, doesn't worry too much. Also seems to generally have a good attitude when he's in teams that he likes. I think as a result, maybe he can be some more of a hype element, more of a confidence builder for the Eliges and Automatics, where they're a little bit more self-contained. They're not like kind of rowdy players. I think he could be the one player who fulfills that, but we don't have to go pure NA and have everyone screaming and go, oh, woo, USA after every round. Like, I'm not a big fan of that personally. I think it's overrated and it can definitely hurt you when things aren't going your way and you don't have that effect. So, like I say, there's a world in which maybe I should take Stewie here. It's just that I've been a little bit less convinced by some of his aspects, which you'll get to. In terms of Fogly being the support, because this is a weird one, right? It's a tough pick because I don't feel as though anyone in NA right now really fits the support role at the level I need to be able to make an NA super team and potentially win majors. I think that the two aspects, here's the problem with NA. This is going to sound like I'm dissing the whole region, but I'm not. They haven't got a super player who stands out as like a superstar. They haven't got a true in-game leader, or at least they can't get the true in-game leaders into the top teams, or the people who could play that role are too pussy. And then they don't have anyone, I think, works as a pure support, the traditional sense that you think of in Europe. So if I'm picking only NA players, I've got to go with someone. So of the available players, I thought this year when I've seen him in NRG, Fogly's been one of the better aspects. Like I said, their trio of stars doesn't always show up that on LAN, especially not deep in it. I thought Fogly's played a decent enough role. He has the mindset to be supportive. He certainly himself has some flaws that I know about him from Team Liquid, which I'm not going to go into. They're not nothing big, but did concern me a little bit about his mentality in that team and was one of the reasons I was in favour of them cutting him. But I think he could do his job here. I don't need that much fragging out of him. I think I've got the stars elsewhere. So he's played solid enough. I'm rewarding him now and saying he'll be able to play this spot. Now, Sean Gares is my in-game leader. First of all, the guy is really smart. I'm talking about really smart. Like, it's not just like his mind for the game. Like, I don't think he's got the best mind for the game. He's like the most intricate tactics or breaking the game. But it's his ability to notice patterns and to find like a win condition, an angle from which you can attack, or a way to adapt to what you're doing or where to go in your bag. So he's not going to have a crazy playbook, but I think he's going to pick well from it, read the game reasonably well. I also think he's good at coming up with concepts, and his style it's coherent, it's complete. He's had it for a number of years now. I like the fact that he's willing to scout opponents, look for those tendencies, look for those little holes I talked about. And also, especially even in terms of star players, I think he does a good job with the scouting report. And I also think he does a pretty good job using his players, finding out where they would best fit. The one area there I have my qualms with him is I do feel like players who are a bit boisterous and demanding. So in this team, it might be someone like a Tarek and Elige. in a different way. Elige isn't going to be boisterous, but he's certainly demanding in his own way. I think that sometimes Sean Gares does lack a bit of authority there and will give a bit too much free rein sometimes to the star players. But with this breakdown I got of players here, maybe that won't matter. So that would be my 5. But here's my mentality, okay? So in this team, we've got the entry duo of Tarek and Elige, assuming I can get one of them to go first. Sean Gares I'm going to have with the entry pack as well, helping out, because we're going to play a lot of forward-facing, attacking Counter-Strike here, not a lot of slow picking off rotations. Then I'm going to have Fogley as like my semi-lurk, Automatic as a lurk as well. I think Fogley's a fairly intelligent player. I think Automatic's just at his best when he can kind of play off angles, have timing on when he's going to attack people, doesn't really want to go first, and he's got the skill set to be able to manage this. So I kind of like the balance on the front and the back end of my team here. I think having S-Gares go forwards also can help trigger when the other players go in, since they're not necessarily natural entries. Now, in terms of why I didn't pick other players, so let's start with Naf, because like I say, earlier this year, probably the best NA player. Late last year, looking like a monster in Renegades, some crazy numbers. Now, the reason I didn't pick him, even though he's this all-round player, is because, first of all, he has a really weird mentality. I think he's one of the more weird players I've ever met in CSGO, actually. Seems to be, like, never seems hyped up, never seems really down, just seems to have a like almost a nonchalant attitude at all times. Like, it doesn't faze him, but not always in a good way. Like, I don't always feel like he's engaged and he's got that drive in the same way himself. He's also, I mean, I don't know if this is in any way due to the fact that he has like partial hearing loss, but he seems to be not that great in terms of calming and pure team play. I've heard from some of his past teammates. So that's also a bit of a knock on him here, especially when instead of him, I can take an Automatic or a Tarek or someone like that. So I'm going to go ahead and say, despite his strengths, and he might end up being the best NA player, I'm not going to take him for this squad because I'm going on known quantities right now. Now, in terms of the in-game leader, before we get to the other players I could have picked, because we'll just go over that, shall we? Why am I taking Sean Gares out of retirement and putting him with a bunch of players he hasn't played with recently or ever and saying, go at it, Sean? Because first of all, yes, I could have Tarek as main game leader and go with a pure NA skill lineup, right? But Tarek has proven he doesn't stick at being the in-game leader. He tried it in Optic, didn't like it, let it go to Snazore. He tried it in Cloud9, had success, gave it up eventually. I was willing to let FNS come in, but then wasn't fully willing to let FNS in. So I don't really like that kind of short-circuiting element that he's having, and the fact that he does it but then gives it up. Then you got to look at Stu2K. Even though Stu2K, I think, was at his best when he did it, I think also his calling, because of how much he had to do entrying, made him somewhat questionable when he went against the God tier EU teams. He's definitely not as bad as he was in 2016, his first ever year as a pro, so I don't hold it against him. But I don't necessarily know that I can trust him to call down the stretch like big executes against those players. The weird thing about Stu2K is he's absolutely, if you're just picking like top X players in NA, he's obviously a top 5 player in NA. I just don't think he necessarily fits here, or other people at the moment are giving me more of what I want, even though, yes, as a pure entry, he's got to be one of the people you'd look to potentially pick. Then you've got the fact that FNS and DAPS, who are, I think, in terms of just pure tactical aspects, setting up, they're good leaders. I think they're pure leaders in the traditional sense. My problem is, first of all, they haven't been fully drilled in terms of experience to the level of a Sean Gares. I also think that they're just pussies. I'm just going to be real. I know them both as people to some degree. I don't know that they have like a killer instinct as an in-game leader to have the full authority, to be the guy who's like, I want it like this, let's set it up this way, you didn't do that correctly. I feel like they give the players too much of what they want, and then when the players don't deliver, they're like, oh, well, we did what we could. They're also both bots as in-game leaders, so, I mean, it's not like there's any difference in picking S-Gares over them in that sense, who isn't a strong player individually, but I don't need a strong player. Then you've got Stanislaw, who is a strong fragger, but seems to have a one-dimensional style of leading that he must do to be comfortable, and has had now too many weird issues with leaving Optic and bombing that major, and then going to Team Liquid, not making it work, and the team actually looking better when he was moved off being an in-game leader. So I have too many qualms about him as an in-game leader right now to feel comfortable doing it, and too many teams have fallen apart with him on. So now let's look at some of the players I didn't pick. So I referenced Stewie2K, why I didn't pick him, why I didn't pick Naf, but let's go with some of the NRG players, shall we? So VeXii. I just have never seen VeXii on LAN as a very good player. I think online he's been pretty good. I can see why people thought he was cheat or why he was an onliner in the past. I just don't think his game's transitioned offline. I don't think he's going to make it as far as what I've seen so far. So then we go to Ethan. Ethan does look like, when you consider how young he is, like in a year or 2 years, then he could be in position to be a very strong player. But right now, he either seems too inexperienced or like he just is only has the odd game that's really good online. I haven't really been that impressed even with their big runs. I didn't think he was that big a part of it, quite frankly. I think he just has the odd map that's really good. Rush, like I say, I could have gone with instead of Stewie or Tarek, but I've seen some confidence issues from him. Twists is probably the one everyone's saying, like, how has his name not come up so far? I'll tell you how. Because when him and Elige were really banging at the end of last year, when they were having those runs to finals in Team Liquid, this guy, yes, he was a very young player at the time, disappeared too many times against the top EU teams and in big matches. And then when I look at him this year, I feel as though you bring in Naf, you've got Elige, he's the guy who's just making all the room for these guys, and he doesn't feel like he's embraced being a star, and that I think his game's dropped off to some reason, and he hasn't been as good. So that's why I didn't pick those players. That's why I did pick the lineup I have. There is still the option in terms of the pure entry that I'm not 100% convinced. And you can see actually, by the way, when I break these players down, some of the flaws of NA as a scene. They've got a lot of players who are similar style of players, and they haven't got some of the players that are distinct that you'd want clear cut for this role. And then they're all spread out among a bunch of different teams, and many of them have attitude issues, personality issues, might not fit together very well. And then I've had to bring my in-game leader out of fucking retirement. So you can see some of the flaws of NA here in how I built my NA super team. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Daniel Yordanov, TTMXMP, VeXii, HawpT, Robert Baxter and Travis Greb, with a special thanks going out to Jerky's Minion. Want teasers for my upcoming content? To ask a question for my monthly AMA? How about taking part in a discussion with me about esports? Or perhaps you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Become a part of the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.